guys, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to the Better Not Better podcast. I am your host, Maya Warren, and today we have a special episode for you and a special guest. But before we get into it, let's get into this intro. So, guys, I want to thank you for being here. I want to remind you to like, comment, subscribe, all those wonderful things. And today, I have with me a special guest who goes by the name of AJ for short, and I will allow him to introduce himself.
Oh man. Thank you so much, Maya. I'm super excited to be on here. Thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast. Man, how do I introduce myself? I actually haven't been, this is my first time being on someone else's podcast before. I guess I'd start off by saying I kind of like to say that I'm a hip hop artist. So, instead of saying, oh, I'm a rapper or I'm a producer or I'm a dancer or these things, I kind of say, hey, I use hip hop in all of its different forms to tell meaningful stories. And so, like, I teach, I before COVID taught dance in my local community. I write music, I produce music, things like that. And I'm just trying to figure out, man, how do we tell stories that can impact people's lives? And how can I help young Christian creatives live out their passions, bear fruit, and glorify God? That's kind of a line stolen from me and my friend Kristen's podcast from last year. But yeah, that's kind of just what I do, and I love doing what I do. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very humble intro, considering all the hats that you wear. So my first question, man, is what was your childhood like?
What was my childhood like? So many ways I could take that question. Also, let me know if there's any kind of echo because I've got my mic running over here.
Gotcha.
My mom and dad were both carriers for the gene for albinism. But I think for my mom, it was like not like she was a carrier in the sense that she didn't show it growing up, but my dad did. But my parents divorced when I was young, so I didn't really end up having any conversations with my family about, hey, like why do I look the way that I look? We're Nigerians, or African Americans living here in the U.S. and all these things. And because my parents got divorced, like when I was so young, there was never really any reason to ask the question to my mom, who I lived with primarily, because it was like, well, she would not be able to provide answers, But, aside from, albinism, I developed this love for hip hop that kind of started on the 4th grade. I found this old stereo in the house that we were renting. And I found a way to get it to work. I started listening to the local radio stations, and I just found myself drawn to hip hop. And since then, I've kind of been building into this whole kind of like, rapper, producer, dancer kind of thing that I do now. Obviously, growing up, there was so many difficulties, but what I do look back at now and notice is that there's this through line of music was something I could always come back to. And music was always a place where I felt like I could be heard, that I could say the things that I was feeling, that I could be myself, and not get shot down or not get looked down upon, or not if people be like, oh, try and like stop me from saying the things. Because even if no one hears the song, I still made the song and I still put my thoughts and feelings somewhere, and it lives on. And so it's really been a blessing being able to now be on the other side of being 23 and looking back at childhood and the struggles and whatnot, whether it be with, self-esteem or whatever, or with friends or family, finances, etc., moving around a lot. But looking back at it now and being like, man, God was so faithful in so many areas.
I'm nodding because I can totally relate. I think something I've noticed with the people that I know that also have albinism is that like we all have that one thing that helped us get through life in general and then life with albinism, because that is also a component of our lives and forever will be. And for me, also in the fourth grade, I started, taking in writing. I had always been involved in music. I was in the church choir growing up as a kid, with my little hair bun in the front of the choir, singing my heart out. But then when I got to piece the music and the words together, that's
Mm.
when I found my sense of catharsis, if you will. So I can definitely relate to you in that. I'm curious to know if you had any challenges related to albinism growing up, so like bullying or just figuring out how to navigate being visually impaired. Like, what was it for you?
Oh yeah. Well, here, why don't I just start with the physical parts? I feel like that part, is probably familiar territory for most people who've heard about albinism. So obviously, no pigment in your skin, hair, or eyes, kind of. Um, and so being out in the sun was a difficulty for me. Um, because there's no pigment to like reflect off the radiation from the sunlight, and so I mean I had to stay inside a lot of the time. I got sunburnt really easily, stuff like that. um, when it came to classes, I always had to sit in the front because your boy cannot see. I do sometimes make videos without my glasses on, but I'm literally blind and just talking. I mean, I'm not literally blind. Thankfully, I was able to like once I start being able to take care of my glasses better, I was able to see quite well and stuff. And I'm actually even trying to get contacts. But uh, that kind of obviously, when you're young, sometimes if you sit in the front of the classroom, especially if you're like a smart kid, I kind of feel prideful almost like saying that. But like kids will make fun of you and be like, oh, you're like a teacher's pet or whatever. So there's that element of it. But then there's also this real sense of like a lack of community or lack of being feeling like you're at home or welcome amongst like when I'm with my American friends, like as a Nigerian, I'm raised differently and have some different values. But then when I'm with some of my black friends, I'd feel like sometimes they might like say something or maybe feel like I wasn't like as black as them. I'm talking about as a kid, not now, but
Mm-hmm.
kids can be vicious, kids can be wild. um, and sometimes even adults could be wild to kids. Like I remember being like
Yes.
at church events and stuff, and people like there were other Nigerians who would think that I was like trying to cause trouble or like wouldn't want me to be around their food or whatever. Because people have all kinds of weird, crazy
Mm-hmm.
thoughts about albinism, like all the things. Um,
Yeah.
so it was definitely difficult. But I think the physical side isn't even really that, not that it's not that bad, but at least for me, I've learned to love the way that I look and learned to love having albinism. I think what was much harder as a kid was the emotional and social component of almost always feeling like, man, I wish there was someone like me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can relate to that. Uh, and I'm glad you mentioned that because, while the physical aspects of albinism are important and all those wonderful things, and they do play a part, man, the social and the emotional and, dare I say it, psychological aspects really play into how we even view the physical parts of albinism. Like, I remember
Oh yeah.
for so long hating my skin because up until like middle school, I was the tallest person and the most fair skinned person everywhere I went. So I felt like just like a stick in the mud, the white sheep in a field of black sheep, the black sheep in a field of white sheep. It was just never like I felt fit in. I remember every time, like I said, I was on the choir. And so when we would travel to other churches, child, when I say as soon as I got in the door, everybody did that stare. And I'm just like, I'm trying to worship Jesus and you looking at me. Clearly, you don't understand what worship means if you got to be gawking at me. But as a kid, I remember that being so frustrating and until like I started doing the research myself and just learning to allow God's perspective to shape my identity and not the stares and the words of other people.
Right, absolutely. And like I will say that I think after a certain point of time, it kind of did flip into a
Hmm.
sense where I wasn't anymore like feeling like an outcast. But then you get to a certain age, and especially if you like maybe move and live in a different place and people haven't met you yet, they'll be
Hmm.
like, "Whoa, are you one of those albinos?" And like they get really, really strange real fast.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and they'll be like, "Whoa, can I touch your hair?" Or like, "I've never seen someone with your hair before. You have blonde eyelash." All the things. And this is a different kind of weird when you get older, but it's like at least it's not the other thing, you know?
Yeah, that flip is real though. I remember, so I was very blessed that when I went to UNCG, there were other students with albinism. So we kind of like linked up and we was like hanging out and stuff. And so I was hanging out with one of my friends and he and I are walking, just gonna go to the park that's on campus. When I say there's this girl and her friend walks up to him, "Oh my God, you're so gorgeous, you're so beautiful. Can I touch your beard?" He didn't even get a chance to say yes or no. She ran her fingers through his beard and he looks at me like, I don't know how to handle this situation right now. So it definitely is a flip.
Craziness.
And my aunt, something she always says to me is like, Maya, remember when you go out in public, you're a celebrity. And I used to not like when she said that because I didn't want to be like noticed until like I started understanding like one, that I wasn't a mistake and I was called to stand out involuntarily for God's glory. And
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
that I think one of the things that helped me was eventually seeing other people with albinism. And now I love having albinism, like, and I love being able to be an advocate for those who have albinism. But it is a journey.
Yeah. And in some ways you almost feel like you're part of this club, so to speak, of people, all around the world and like I've had white friends with albinism and black friends with albinism. And
Same.
uh, like you see people on social media and maybe you see like an albino person in a TV show and you're like, oh man, like
Yeah,
they,
yeah,
they did it. They made it.
yeah. And now I'm really like pumped that we're starting to see the emergence of positive images of albinism in the media
Yes.
because for so
Yeah.
long there have been so many like negative depictions of us like as villains, people with red eyes who are afraid of the sun, but now we're starting to see more positive energy images and that gets me excited because
Yeah.
I'm all about the next generation. I'm always thinking like how is the way that I'm acting going to affect generations of young people with albinism behind me. So I think that's really
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we also understand that in a certain sense,
Hmm.
not just people with albinism, but also like being black in America, you have to recognize like, okay, like if someone has no relationships with black people and you're, the first person they meet, well, you have to, not that you have to, but unfortunately you have to kind of give forth like a good representation of like, you don't want them to think that you're, and again, I wish we didn't have to be like this, like you're one of
Hmm.
those black people, or like
Yeah.
that you're not too crazy or you're not, you
Yeah.
know, dangerous, quote unquote, uh,
Hmm.
all these things. Uh, and so there's like, we understand these things. And so then with
Hmm.
albinism, it's just another layer of like, okay, I'm obviously not just like we should, hey, do the thing, get your education, work hard, be diligent, be excellent at what you do, but
Hmm.
also it's not just a matter of I don't want to be seen as a threat, but I also don't want to be seen as like a pet either. Like I don't want to be seen as like,
Yeah.
oh,
A
you're the guy with the
token.
tricks and the skills, and it's like, well,
Yes.
I'm just a guy.
For my final project, my senior project in high school, I did this spoken word piece called From My Perspective. And in it, I talk about the feeling of being seen as almost an exhibit in a zoo
Yeah.
or in a museum. And it's a very real thing, not just for people with albinism, but a lot of times for African Americans as well. And something that I'm constantly reminded of is just um, that we literally are representatives of not just our culture, but of the kingdom of God. And so, even in my responses as a Black woman, as a woman with albinism, there's a certain amount of grace that I have to carry myself with, and the ability to carry myself with that grace can only come from God, because otherwise,
Mm.
it'd be
Amen.
very easy to be like, "What you looking at?" You know,
Right.
you
And so then we
know.
take that and we bring it over into our faith and we say,
Mhm.
okay, I'm a Christian and the world has a certain idea of what people who follow Jesus are like. Let's show them the real Jesus and let's show
Mhm.
them what it really looks like to live a life that follows God. And now that is where some really good like evangelism and ministry can happen with your non-believing friends where they're like, Christians are this or that or the other, and you can be like, is that what you think of me as well? And you've already shown them by your relationship and your character like what the Holy Spirit can do and who Jesus is, and it's their blessing. I feel like it's almost like a
Preach.
training grounds. It
It
sounds like a weird way to
is.
put it, but
And it is. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you know, I don't know if I'm the only person with albinism who feels this way, but I feel like albinism has become a tool for ministry. And I say this because a lot of times people see the physical aspect, but they don't know um, the physical like the vision impairment. They don't know the internal stuff that goes on. And so what happens is, like when I was playing basketball, for instance, a lot of people just knew, they thought I was just the girl with albinism who was hooping. But when they got to know me and they figured out, like, oh, she's visually impaired, like, hey, how are you able to do what you do and have a good attitude about it? Oh, I love those questions, because now I get to say, once upon a time, I used to be
well,
this way. Uh-huh.
have you heard of
But
Jesus?
yes, but then God changed my life, and through the power of the Holy Spirit, I now understand my identity. And they're like, "Who's Holy Spirit?" And then it just starts all these questions, and it becomes a tool. And in the same way, my chronic illnesses that I have and my disabilities that I have, they serve as tools and modicums to minister to people in ways that you might not get your foot in the door otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Let me see what Casper's. Question for AJ. What does it mean for you to be a Christian first and a Black man second?
Yeah, I saw that. So we're just hopping in with the questions,
Yeah,
right?
because I think it ties nicely into what we're talking about.
Um, what does it mean? I think, you know, there's a lot of things, that I've like identified with throughout my life, like whether that be, you know, things really silly. I used to want to be a cook when I was a little kid. I saw the movie Ratatouille and I was like, that's me. I wanted to be a cook at a five-star restaurant, maybe in Paris, who knows? That obviously is not my dream anymore. um, I also had a season of like, man, I want to be the next, Pitbull or 50 Cent or Lil Wayne or these guys. That was something that I identified with. I identified as a cook. I identified as a rapper. I love video games. I identified as a gamer. Um, I was also, tried to be like a class clown for a little while. I tried to identify as the funny guy. Um, all these different identities, I think there's elements to them where I found like really cool community, like amongst other gamers or amongst other hip hop artists. And you can even look at all the things I was involved in high school and in college and be like, you could say AJ is this or AJ is that. But part of why I go by AJ for short is because I don't want to be known as AJ the rapper or AJ the dancer or AJ the Black guy, AJ the guy with albinism. I think those things are all important and they're all parts of who I am, but I'm really just AJ. And AJ surrenders to one identity, and that's being a child of God. And so I think that means if pass the offering plate, I'm just kidding. If elements of those identities, like there's certain parts of gamer culture that I'm like, you know what? I
Mm-hmm.
don't I don't need to have the newest game automatically. I should probably save some money because the Bible calls me to be a good financial steward. There's some elements of like Black culture where I feel like, hey, maybe we're a little bit like as a on a macro level, maybe too flippant with, you know, the just kind of saying whatever we want. I think we should be bold, but there's also an element of, okay, there's a point where you can get a little bit too bold, and like the Bible obviously calls us, you know, let our words be seasoned with salt, saying what people want to hear, you know, be all things to all men. So I think, what does it mean to be a Christian first and a Black man second? I'd say that it's a matter of like, it's not that I'm any less Black because I'm a Christian. I think it's that I I let my um, status, position as a child of God, that identity kind of inform and touch all the other identities. So it's not like a first, second, third. It's more like a circle and then a web that shoots out like this. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And to touch on that, as a Black woman, second and a Christian first, the way I view it is the idea of permeation. So
Oh,
when you
okay.
think of the process of osmosis, it is a solution being essentially overtaken by a solute that is being dissolved in it. So you pour um, Kool-Aid into a pitcher of water. Well, now it consumes the entirety of that pitcher and it becomes Kool-Aid. And
Hmm.
in the same way, our Christian identity is formulated by our DNA as a kingdom individual, kingdom man, kingdom woman. And so that DNA takes over every aspect of our life to the point where our paradigm is no longer what do I feel, what do I say, what does the world say? It becomes what is the perspective of the one who my DNA is attached to say. What does he say about me? What does he say about this issue? Oh, race relations. God calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. There's the sin of partiality. Partiality. We are not to show favoritism to anyone on any basis, not just skin color. So it becomes the perspective through which that we live our lives, and it should say should because people be wilding out here in these streets. It should dominate the way that we treat people in our relationships, so much so that they know us for who we represent instead of the things that we attach ourselves to that are not like who we represent.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And it looks like Jane says, I just learned some science. I love that. Yeah, I forget you can see the comments in the little sidebar here. That's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's a great feature to have, especially being visually impaired. So, we've talked about a lot of stuff already. Now, I kind of want to pivot and talk about how you found um, a passion through music and serving your community, because I think those two things are important.
Okay. How I found say me the question one more time for me. How I found a passion for serving and for music. That sound about right? Um, I'd say how I found my passion for music was that, like I said, fourth grade. I'm in my room. I found this stereo. You know, I end up figuring out like getting all the chords and stuff together to make it work. Um, I started listening to these songs. A lot of Kanye West. You know, a lot of Jay-Z. It's kind of like Watch the Throne era. Um, and I would learn the words, and then I'd literally wait by my stereo for those songs to come back on, so I could rap the words back to the stereo, and kind of like prove that I'd like learned these lyrics. And then obviously when I discovered this beautiful thing called YouTube and lyric videos, oh, my world was changed forever. So good. Um, and I think when a few years later kind of started following Jesus and stuff, I started to change the music that I listened to, because I was like, oh man, like I want to live life for Jesus, but also some of the stuff in these songs is kind of disagreeing with the life that I want to live. And that was like a personal conviction, not like a blanket statement for all people to listen to and to adhere by. But what it did was it put me into this mindset of, okay, how do I use music for Jesus? How do I use my life for Jesus? Um, Developed forward a little bit. And once I started to kind of feel the dissonance, or like the disconnect between good quality music, like music that was mixed well, mastered well, had good production behind it, lyrically masterful, etc., and then kind of like music with like a meaningful message, like content that could actually move the needle in people's lives, move them forward. When I started to realize those things had some disconnect to them, I was like, okay, there needs to be some way to put these together. And so I thought, okay, well, a way that I could possibly serve is to be part of what puts those two things together. Um, so I stepped into music production, and I think that's where a lot of like the big passion for music came in. And going to the school that I went to California Lutheran University, to study music production as a major. That school is also where I found this program called Young Life, where I was able to start kind of doing outreach ministry. And at first, I was kind of really resistant to it. I was like, I don't know. Um, but I went to a Young Life camp for a weekend, and I heard about how different people were in different parts of their walk of faith because of this program. And I was like, man, this is something I want to be a part of. So it's kind of the same idea of, okay, I see a disconnect, whether it's quality and content, or I see a disconnect, whether it's, hey, there's people out there in like the church world, and there's like the actual world that, you know, high schoolers and college students live in. And I wish for there to be more connection between the two. And so I'm like, man, how can I go forth and be part of what causes that connection to happen? And I think that's where the passion comes in, where I feel like I'm this little octopus, so to speak, you know, grabbing all the things with my suction cups and bringing them together. And
Yep.
sometimes it's not even a matter of how can I do it for me, but I
Mm-hmm.
think if I can get two people together who are maybe didn't know that they needed to, like whether it's like someone who's like a musician and someone who's a producer, or someone who needs graphic design stuff and someone who has a church, or someone who's been looking for a church, they're trying to find a place, someone who does nothing, that doesn't want anything to do with Jesus, but they do want community. uh, Finding ways to connect people to the things that they really need.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where my passion comes in, and that's the thing that I can then take into any job or any field. It's not just, oh, I want to be the world's best rapper, you know, which is not my goal, or oh, I just want to have a cool ministry. It's like, no, I mean that the goal is so much deeper, and I think when you have a deeper why and a deeper goal, which often comes from trying, you become more passionate about the thing you're doing, even if it's not your first choice at a career.
Preach, 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 preach. And I'm glad you said that because um it is so true. I had a interview conversation with Pastor Roy. I don't know if you know him, but he was dropping gems and we were talking about productivity. And I asked him, how will someone with a medical condition, disability, or chronic illness be able to figure out their purpose so that they can be productive? And he said, serving. Serving is how you get to that place. And if you serve in multiple areas and then you're able to dwindle it down, that's great. And that is so true. One of my favorite animated movies
Mm.
is Robots.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
one of the quotes in that movie that like I literally think all the time, served by this quote, and it's
Mm.
see a need, fill a need.
Wow.
And the reason why that stuck with me all these years is because once you are able to discern or see someone's need, that's great. But if you're able to take that, what you just absorbed and what you noticed, and act upon it in order to be a conduit to fill that need, that is what we need more of. And that's how
Mm.
the world gets changed. And I think for me, even like with what's going on in the world today, part of why, people are like, well, what's your opinion on this? What, like, I can have an opinion, but I'm more about action. How can I fill a need? Because as people of God, if we all were in a place where we were doing the last thing that God told us to do, which is often the
Mm.
thing that we don't want to do, but it's the thing
Yeah.
that He wants to use to fill a need. If we all operated in that, we would be in a much different place as the global church, not just Western church, but globally. And because I don't have time to argue with people online, I'm trying to make change and fill needs in my community. And I think once we have that attitude, we'll find our purpose and we'll be less likely to be trying to run somebody else's race because we're over here serving with the heart to fill a need.
Yeah. Wait, can I ask you a question? Because
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I, I've literally been thinking about this lately. Like, do you think that that's so? Obviously, like that quote stuck with you from that
Mm-hmm.
Robots movie. I
Mm-hmm.
completely forgot about that quote. Like, whenever time I think of that movie, all I think of is that one Britney Spears scene.
Yeah.
Where, but do you think that that's like a personality type thing, or do you think that's a calling thing for all people? Because I feel like to me internally, I'm like, man, like you said, see a need, fill a need.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm like, I just like I want to serve and I want to do these things, but I feel like that's I don't necessarily know if I can or if
Mm-hmm.
I should necessarily ask someone else to do the same thing. Only because I feel like sometimes people are, whether they're like maybe really introverted or
Mm-hmm.
like not super confident, or like I'm not asking this as a trick question. Like I'm
Oh
legitimately
no,
curious if you
it's a
think,
good
is that like
question.
a, oh, certain personalities are more drawn to that, or you think that's like a, this is good
Yeah.
for human
So
flourishing.
my plumb line for saying the see a need, feel a need thing, obviously, you know, as the Bible talks about, we all have different gifts. We all have different personalities. And so despite those things, we are still called to fulfill the Great Commission, to go out and reach people with the gospel, which is serving people. We are called to serve, whether we're a preacher, a teacher, apostle, a prophet, sweeping the floor. We are called to serve in some capacity, regardless of personality. Now, given our personalities and our interest in the things that God places in our heart, that's going to determine what it looks like. Some people are great at being activists and active and advocates, and they go
Right.
out there and they get it on the streets. Some people serve by funding the ministries of people who are activists and active. Some people are great at marketing for their churches and social media. They're serving a need and meeting mass amounts of people, even though they're behind the scenes. Some
Yeah.
people are extremely talented communicators, like Pastor Roy and Ruslan. They're able to touch people in ways that maybe you and I might not even be able to touch people. Some people are really talented at producing music, they just can't sing, but the quality and the heart at which they serve the artists they produce for comes together, and you get an end product that blesses people and touches people. Some people work at Chick-fil-A and you're in the drive-through and you having a bad day, but when you hear my pleasure, you forget a little bit less about that bad day you're having. That is a
Yes.
service. So whether we're sitting with people in a nursing home and not saying a word but just providing our presence, or
Mm.
practicing graphic design skills, loving our spouses, loving our neighbors, that is all serving. I think we have to change the way that we look at service.
Okay.
service is, I think the society we live in has done a disservice to service, because you have
Oh,
YouTubers
oh,
who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and record them giving away X amount to communities. But there is a vast amount of people behind the scenes who don't get a camera, but who are
mm,
having more of an impact on people's daily lives than we'll ever really know. Um, One of the things that has always stuck with me when I was in middle school, um, these kids were talking about our janitor, like, oh, he's so mysterious. He's so mysterious. He's so cool and all that. He was really silent, but really cool guy. And our principal, we were just hanging out with her, and she was like, "You do know this man is a millionaire, right?" And we were all like, "What? We don't get it." And when we asked him why he was a janitor, even though he had all that money, he said because he had a heart to serve the next generation. And that
mm,
stuck with me. Like, it doesn't matter who you are or what you do, you have an opportunity to serve others. Like, the gifts that we have are not our own. We are not our own. Even the things that have been to our detriment, seemingly God works for our good so that he can get the glory and so that we can bless others. Um, so yeah, that is my answer. Like, it comes down to, one, what does the Bible say? We're all called to serve. There's no exception, whether you have a
mm.
disability or not. God can give you strategies on how to serve. And your personality and your traits and your passions and the things that you're uh thrilled and enthusiastic about, those become modicums to serve. We just have to change the way that we view service. Jesus said, even if you give a cup of water in my name, you are
Yeah,
blessing him. And I think we've gotten so attached to, wow, this person gave $1 million to so and so. Don't think that $1 million is any worth more than you giving a cup of water to someone who needed it.
right. Yes. I definitely agree. And I saw earlier, my guy Paul, he asked like if I think Kanye West's recent themes in his music can kind of like segue the gospel to be more prominent in hip hop. I think, there's like what you're saying, like everyone's like callings are kind of different and stuff. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for Kanye, I did this project on Kanye a couple years ago for my music business class. You had to kind of pick,
Mm-hmm.
um, like pick a person or a record label to kind of just do a report on, and you have a lot of freedom to do it. So I kind of talked about how Kanye is he's definitely a very how do you say, eccentric kind of guy, very eclectic as well. And I think because of those things, he's kind of risen up super high into the world of hip hop. One would say he's one of the greats. I would say he's one of the greats, at least from a production perspective. Um, and I think for him, I think he really truly felt that, hey, when he started the whole Jesus is King thing, that he was called to do it, and I think if and then he put out the Jesus is King album, and a lot of people were like, this is so good, this is so good. And I was like, I guess it's like, all right, it's an okay, solid album. Like, I've heard a lot of much better Christian albums than Jesus is King. But then he puts out this new album, Donda, that came out 2 days ago. And I'm like, I think this is almost like a better representation of what I feel like Kanye is personally called to do, like somewhere between the two, between Jesus is King and Donda. Just like the idea of like, man, being someone who is one of the greats of hip hop, is an excellent producer, has all kinds of crazy out there ideas. Like the first song is really just chanting his mom's name for like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
like who sat there and was like, Donda, 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 but he has callings and abilities, and I think it's really cool seeing him do that. I think
Mm-hmm.
I myself am still figuring out like, okay, where do I kind of fit in all of this? Because I know I
Mm-hmm.
love music, but I also don't. like I said earlier, I don't want to be AJ the rapper, AJ the dancer, I want to be AJ for short,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I think Kanye is 100% helping make the gospel more of a thing in hip hop, but I also think it's always been there. I think we just moved away from it, and
Mm-hmm.
now kind of culture is coming back a little bit with Kanye and even, dare I say it, Justin Bieber. I know
Mm-hmm.
people are going to get up in arms when I say that, but
Well,
yeah, we all have callings, like you're saying. I think
yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out how do I not try and project my own personal callings onto other people and say you have to do this my
Oh
way.
yeah. Yeah, and like I said, like it's not that I'm saying like you need to, and I think as the church, we got to stop thinking that just because the thing that God calls us to doesn't look like what our pastor or what the local evangelist does, doesn't make it any less of a calling. Like obedience to God um is the blueprint for understanding what you're supposed to do. And I think part of my mission is to help people see that regardless of the obstacles you face, like God has a plan for you. Like he didn't wake up yesterday and was like, oh shoot, I didn't know Maya was gonna deal with chronic migraine disease. Like he
Oh,
didn't,
surprise.
he's not surprised at all. And I think part of my mission, by giving a platform to medical conditions, chronic illness, and disability awareness is to show that despite, what the world projects people with disabilities to be and chronic illnesses to be, we are here. We also have the Imago Day, and we are capable of contributing to society and serving. It just takes accommodations and facing different challenges and knocking down barriers. And I think once we understand that service is a lot simpler than we've made it out to be, that's when people can be passionate. Like it really doesn't take much.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really great that that's what you felt is like your calling,
Hmm.
because like I remember when you like didn't have any videos on your YouTube channel, you had like two or three, and I was like, man, like I wonder what kind of videos Maya's gonna make. Like I thought you were gonna make kind of like not necessarily like the same kind of videos as like Ruslan and Pastor
Hmm.
Roy do, but like I was like, oh, just probably gonna do like Christian teaching videos and stuff. But then you kind of really went hard at like the man, like how to set people who are differently abled up for success and how
Hmm.
to advocate for yourself. And then when you started the podcast, I was like, oh, this is gonna be cool too. And you were like bringing on all these different guests, all these different disabilities. I was like, oh, this right here, there's no one doing this, at least like not in like the Christian YouTube space. Like this is some good stuff. Sometimes like people have told me like, AJ, wait, you're like an albino rapper, you should like capitalize on that, and talk more about like lean into the like albinism kind of thing. And I'm like, you know, I see what you're saying, but I also like, for me personally, like I'm the director of a college ministry, like I've got,
Hmm.
I got things to do. I got places to be for this particular season in my life. And I feel content, at least right now. Like I know where I'm going, but I think like you've really figured out like, man, this right here is how I can exist in a space that's not super filled up yet. Cause I think even in like the secular YouTube space, you want to call it that, there also
Hmm.
isn't really like showcasing disabilities and how to be better and not bitter. I like that little wordplay right there. Um,
Appreciate it.
so I think yes, please keep doing what you're doing. It's so good. It's so
I
good.
appreciate the flowers and stuff, but really it's like all God. And the crazy thing is talking about my experiences with disability and chronic illness was the very thing that I was like, okay, God, I'll create anything, but we're not gonna touch that. And for like a year or so, he was like, okay, you upload your little music covers, I'll let you do that.
Mm,
And
yeah.
then it was in one of the worst migraine attacks that I had to date. I was like couldn't move, couldn't think or nothing.
Mm.
And those are the times when God chooses to really speak the most. So I've learned to cherish even moments like that. And he was like, "Look, I love you, but you got two options. Are you gonna allow this to make you better?
Mm.
And are you gonna trust me through it so you can become better, or are you gonna allow it to make you bitter
Oh,
and shut your
bars.
eyes off to your future?" And I was just kind of like laying in bed, head throbbing, nauseated, like, oh, okay. And like as soon as I said, okay, I hear you, God. I'm not gonna run from doing the thing that you've been impressing on my heart to do. And so, literally in December, I created the logos, all of that for the podcast, my YouTube channel, changed the entire aesthetic all in December. And
Yeah.
so, by the time I uploaded my first video with the changes, everybody's like, "Oh wow, this is sudden." No, it had been in the oven for a while, and I think the humbling thing about it is I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing. But the thing is, I'm kind of like Abraham in the wilderness. Like I'm just going with God. You know,
Oh
there's
yeah.
the illustration in the Old Testament of the cloud by day and the fire by night. And I like that illustration and how God gives that to us because, as seasons change and assignments change, and I've just learned to trust God and not be married to seasons. Because if you're married to a season, when it's time for you to transition or change, you're going to fight it all the more and prolong what God wants to teach you and show you in the next season. So I'm learning to not be married to seasons, but just serve faithfully in these seasons and
Yeah.
trust God that when He says, okay, time to pick up your tent and let's go in another direction, just go with it.
And I feel like you're literally speaking into my life right now. Because I'm like, because the things that you're talking about is like a lot of what the stuff that's been on my mind for like the past year of like I don't know if I've necessarily told you this, but I've literally had like so many jobs over the last couple years, even during
Wow.
COVID. Like when COVID first hit, I was like a dance teacher, and I was
Wow.
like, man, like this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be, hey, I'm teaching hip hop here in Thousand Oaks at different places. I was working on a couple pieces at Cal Lutheran, like the college. I was teaching a team over at the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is kind of like where I thought things were going. Then COVID hits, and I was like, shoot, you cannot, you just literally could not do dance. You couldn't meet in person. If you could, you had to wear masks. It was just not going to happen. And then, I kind of started being like a TikTok ambassador for this program because, like
Mm-hmm.
I spent way too much time on TikTok. And then actually, a sort of like a friend of mine / old supervisor was like, hey, come and we would love to have you on our TikTok team to just, hey, help us make some TikToks. And so then I did that for a while. And then I came back to Boys and Girls Club and was kind of running like a summer camp. And I was working with 5-year-olds. And I was like, I am not built for 5-year-olds. This is not the wave. Then I started doing DoorDash. And then I was a substitute teacher. And then one day I was like, man, I saw this job position for like a vegan podcast editor. How funny would it be if I got this job? So I applied for like the memes, and then
Mm-hmm.
I got the job. And funny thing is, it's now kind of transition, and it's like now because some of the YouTube editing wasn't working, they now have me working on TikToks, and it's
Mm.
like, oh, all the stuff that I was out here doing before and all the craziness of COVID is kind of coming together. Like I understand what kids are into because I was teaching dance in middle school with to a bunch of TikTok kids.
Mm-hmm.
I was making TikToks for this program that I don't work for anymore. I was a substitute teacher, spending a lot of time with high schoolers and whatnot. And now it's come back and it's like, hey, make TikToks, expand the reach of this podcast, and
Mm-hmm. That's
don't be
that's
married to seasons because God's going to use stuff you're learning in one and then put you in another one so you can actually apply the things and actually use them and actually
yes.
grow.
Preach, sir. And I'm glad you said that because like even in you just describing all the jobs that you've held in like the last couple years, like I see the common thread of you serving people. Like God had you behind the scenes. He has you behind the scenes now. And these are skills that you're building that set you up for whatever it is God intends for you to do in the future. And it adds value to your work in the sense that, oh, wow, he's had so much experience, but with that experience comes an attention to detail, excellence, and quality. So that's dope. And I can relate. I haven't done a lot of jobs, but I've done a lot of serving in my community and volunteering. And in like 2019, I had no social media. If that's
Mm.
hard, if that's easy for anyone to believe, I had zero social media. Didn't have Facebook, Instagram, none of it. And I was in my dorm room. Again, migraine attacks in summer school. Wasn't doing that well in summer school because I couldn't get to class because the migraine attacks were just like frequent and intense. And then I felt this call to start an Instagram account and start a Facebook account. And I'm like, I really don't want to do this. I like to be private, And
Yeah.
so I just ran with it. And then I had always loved graphic design and I had paid attention to fonts and typography and all those things. I've always been fascinated by it. And then I started doing that. And then a year later, the creative coordinator at my church reaches out to me like, hey, do you want to, chat about possibly being the social media coordinator for the church? And I was like, who, me? Uh, and, but then I thought about it and I prayed about it. And I looked back at the experience I had built over the year and I was like, okay, well, God, I trust that if you're opening this door, the fact that I feel disqualified
Mm.
isn't true. I'm qualified because you called me, and I'm qualified because you know that this opportunity is going to stretch me. And sometimes I can mistake the stretching for punishment or a no, when actually stretching is progression and God growing me. And so for the past year and maybe like 6 months now, I've been the social media coordinator. And then all that built up to the changes to my YouTube channel. So now everything is like touching everything else. And it's just um, comforting to know that the ebbs and flows of the faith, the detours he takes us on, are not because he's just
Yeah.
twiddling his thumbs and playing with us like we're puppets. They serve a purpose. And when he says all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose, he means it. And so learning to take God at his word, even when we're going through these ebbs and flows, is so essential.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's the permeation. It's back.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm. Full
uh,
circle.
it's just all coming full circle. It's almost like it's almost like this is your YouTube channel or something. How'd you know to put those things together?
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I have one more question before I ask you the main question. I'm curious to know, what is something that God is teaching you or has taught you during the pandemic that you feel is now helping you?
Oh man, what is something that God's teaching me, or that God has been teaching me? I mean, a lot of things, honestly. There was a season, um, like kind of like sometimes like I forget how long this pandemic's been because it just keeps going, it just keeps going. um, but there was a little while there where I felt like every week there was like a new difficulty, like a new crazy thing going on in my life, like a new thing to discourage me or whatnot. And so that was hard, and there were a lot of lessons in there. I think a few big ones were separating my identity from the things that I do. So when I was a student at Kalu, we have multiple studios on campus. Well, we have like two. And so I was always going to the studio to do my recording. because I didn't own a mic, I didn't own an interface, I didn't own like cables or anything. So I'd go to the on-campus studio, you know, book some time and go in to do my recordings. And so my timetable was, okay, we're going to work this final semester of school, spring 2020. We're going to put out an amazing EP at the end of the, you know, when summer rolls around, because that was our capstone. And then over time, I'm slowly going to build up all my stuff. And so what happens? COVID. So then we're not allowed to go to the studio anymore. And we're also all sent out of the dorms. And so I'm now living, even if I could go to the studio, I'm an hour away from it anyway. And I didn't have a car at this time. So all my plans, you know, just kind of thrown up into the air. But what it forced me to do is be like, okay, even if I can't make the music I want to make right now, that might make me feel some type of way, but why does it make me feel that way? Why do I feel so bad that I can't make music? Is it because I love music, or is it because I was placing my identity in putting together this project? Or is it because, you know, and so I had to kind of start doing some separations. And even with Young Life, you know, a lot of what Young Life is going out there and spending time with kids. And since I wasn't able to do that, it was like, okay, am I sad because I'm not able to spend time with kids, or am I sad because I'm placing my identity in this thing that I was doing? So just learning to just take those things and separate them, separate the work that you do from like your identity and who you are as a person. I think that was the first big one, as well as just, you know, letting you know, they say if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. You know, we have
Oh,
plans that
yeah.
they don't work all the
I
time.
laugh because literally that's the same lesson God has been teaching me. Like, because for so long, I attached what I did with my identity and the amount of productivity that I was able to output.
Yes.
And like in high school, I was an octopus. I was in poetry club, human relations,
Oh
health
yeah.
occupation,
Oh yeah.
students of America, jazz band, basketball. Like I was all over the place. And then college came and God was like, okay, I let you do what you wanted to. Now will you listen and just let me take you on a journey? Child, I said, yes, I didn't know what I was getting into,
Oh
but that's
no.
faith
Oh
for
man.
you.
Oh man.
And, you know, even in the pandemic, like God had to teach me, like, what you do is great. That's great. Like I called you to do what you're doing, but don't get it twisted. If I call you to do something else, like don't attach your identity to it. Because like I said, don't be married to a season. Don't be married to the things that he equips you with as tools, because tools are just designed to enhance you know, visibility to the glory of God.
Yeah.
You know, but if we attach our identity to the very thing that's supposed to give God glory, then we've missed the mark. And so just learning that by understanding, okay, I do graphic design, and that's great. But if God calls me to mop the floors in the church, that's just as great. And that doesn't make me any less of a servant, doesn't make me any less of a
Yeah.
person. It just means God is building stuff in me that I can't see. And also detaching what we do um, from who we are is important, because you can't take care of yourself if you don't do that. Like,
Mm.
if you're constantly like, I gotta create, or I gotta rap, or I gotta serve, and you neglect your own temple, then you're no good to do the thing that you're called to do, because you've attached your identity to the thing that you need to separate from in order to take care of yourself. And, you know, that even goes back to destigmatizing or demystifying self-care, because that is a biblical principle. So yeah, I definitely hear you on that.
Oh yeah. And you know, and I don't know if you're necessarily like this. I think we have pretty similar personalities. I think
Mhm.
um especially, you know, if you're kind of in this, you know, content creation space, when you obviously you're going to end up speaking about things, you probably want to speak with authority and confidence and stuff like that. I know for me, a big lesson that I've also had to learn is to let myself be a student again, to kind of let myself be a kid and let myself learn and also let myself listen. because I so much think that I have all the answers to all of life's problems and to everyone else's life problems too. Oh, that one gets me in the most trouble. And I don't, this is not the case. I do not have all the answers. I do not have the
Mm-hmm.
answers to all of life's problems, mine or anyone else's. But when I just take a moment and step back and say, like, okay, I've gotten the opportunity because of this new side job that I got working with this podcast of meeting people who are very well known, kind of in like the, in their world of like health and wellness and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of be like, okay, how can I just listen here? How can I be a student to these other like more senior editors or other people who are better at all these things? How can I be a student? How can I not think that I know how everyone should live their life? As a young life leader, how can I be like, man, it's not about me telling other people what they should do. How can I listen to what's going on in their lives? Because then I might even be able to better communicate who Jesus is in a way that they'll actually understand and hear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think just being a student, being a listener, being a learner, when Jesus sent his disciples on the Great Commission, he said, go forth and make disciples of all nations. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about disciples as in like followers.
Mm-hmm.
But the word disciple also, you think of the word a discipline. It's
Mm-hmm.
someone who learns, someone who's a student. So Jesus' disciples were learning from him. Go forth and make learners, make students of all nations. I think that might possibly be one of the biggest callings on Christians. Like, how can we not everyone try and be a teacher, but how can we be learners? How can we be students again and enjoy the joy of being a kid and being fascinated by the world and being like fascinated by God and fascinated by what's going on in people's lives and just listen and learn. I think there's a lot of beautiful value in there that we might be missing out on.
I agree. And like something that I've always been is what I call a lifelong learner. And that is like literally, I spend hours on YouTube learning how to do certain things, certain skills. And um, even part of the reason why I, started this podcast is because I don't know everything about every disability or chronic illness,
Right.
but who's an expert? The people who actually live in those scenarios. So why not have them on here so I can learn? Like, a lot of times people look at these videos and they're like, I learned so much. Yeah, I'm glad you learned, but I learned a lot too. And even if someone has a similar condition, no two people's experiences are the same. So being able to humble myself and say, okay, what is your experience like? And it all compounds because I take what I learn here and it translates when I serve people in my community, when I work with different individuals who may have intellectuals or physical or invisible disabilities, and just being able to, check yourself like, okay, you may think you know in a certain area, but there's always someone who knows more. There's always someone who's going to be better. There's always going to be someone who's smarter. There's always going to be someone who has more money. Just being able to say, okay, let me turn my rebuttal brain off and let me just sit and listen. Like, and that translates into our personal relationships. Like, there are people in our lives that we may not always disagree with, but being able to listen um and learn like why they may think a certain way. Like if someone's rude to you at Chick-fil-A, like I've never had that happen, but let's
Never
just
happened
say
before.
if someone's like, "May I take your order?" Just being able to understand that, don't take that personally, because someone may be going through something in their life behind the scenes and they just don't know how to emotionally process that in a healthy way. So being able to learn from that and have grace for people not only builds your knowledge base, but it builds discernment and wisdom in relationships.
Mm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it'll save you from a whole lot of beef.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, fam. We have talked about a lot, but my last question for you is, what or who in your life has helped you to become better and not bitter.
I see you took the title of the podcast and you put it into I see what you did there. I see what you did there. Um, here's what I would say. I think there's so many ways I could answer this, and I think when I was in high school, I was part of this program called Zero Gravity. I know, a really intense name. It was like a church youth group, and the people who led the program, they were like rappers and people who were kind of like part of the hip hop scene or had been in the past. And I remember going there, and there was something about the way that they treated me where it was like I had so much value. Like I was so loved, I was so seen, I was so known, and they'd give me guidance, on how to live my life. And um, that was an experience that was kind of new to me. The idea of like adults kind of just being loving and being compassionate just uh, because they just loved and cared about you. It was mind blowing, and I think that was something that kind of really softened my heart. Especially to now, step into the world of youth ministry and stuff. And I think just taking some time to acknowledge, this is the big thing. Things that happen in your life are not happening to you, but they're happening for you. I think about the fact that I can't do outdoor sports, because I have albinism. I think about the fact that I have to spend time inside, that I have to spend, extra time, making sure that like my skin's taken care of. I think about the fact that I can't see super well. All those things, like I could have been, like I was one of the fastest guys on my freshman and sophomore, like PE class. And I kind of wanted to do track the following year, but I couldn't because that would require being outside. But instead of that, because I couldn't do track, I auditioned for the dance team at the end of my sophomore year. And that kind of started me on this whole crazy journey of learning more about dance, and even led into me being able to like get jobs doing dance stuff, and actually starting to use dance as a way of like expressing myself in a way that I hadn't before. Dance changed my life, but that wouldn't have happened if I had been able to do track and if I didn't have albinism. And so kind of you could look at these things and saying, man, why me? Why was I chosen to have this disability? Why was I chosen to have the family dynamic that I have? Why did these things have to happen in my life? And those things can make you bitter. But if instead we take a moment to look at them and say, what if life was happening for me? What if, hey, I wish that my family was a different way, but that might cause me to be more softened up by this idea of adults just loving me just because, and that then catapulting me into wanting to do youth ministry. Man, why do I have albinism? Why am I so sensitive to the sun? But that kind of forcing me to do dance and indoor sport is like that pushed me into this whole new world of expression. What would happen if we changed our perspective from life happening to us to life happening for us? I think that's the big thing that makes all of the change. Oh, I see Bible verses popping up on the screen.
Yes, yes. And as you were talking and as I kind of pondered like this entire conversation, like the common theme or the common motif throughout this conversation has been basically Romans 8. And I'll read it out loud for my fellow visually impaired folks. And it is, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. Like when you think of the goodness of God in allowing his creation to be involved in what he wants to fulfill on the earth. Like, that is encouragement alone. But then when you bring it down to a micro level, individual level, and you think about all the things that we caused and suffered the consequences for, the things that happened in our lives that we had no control over, and the doors that were closed, the doors that were open. When you think about all of that, and the fact that God is putting things together for his good in spite of all of those things, like, that is mind-blowing, encouraging, and it just makes me feel like, okay, God, I can go through anything because I know that it serves a purpose for your purpose, and that, one, we're not living in a sense like YOLO, you only live once. No,
Yeah.
we're living so that we can live again.
Yeah.
And
And it takes a lot of the pressure off too, because
yeah.
I think we think to ourselves, especially, if you kind of were into the whole, like, don't waste your life, John MacArthur kind of stuff, there's this idea of like, I like to talk about purpose, but I also recognize like, okay, it's okay if in a certain season of your life what you're doing is driving DoorDash. Like, you're not wasting your life by driving DoorDash. Or some people think like,
No.
man, yeah, I there's nothing that I can do about this certain situation that's going on with a friend. And it's like, look, just because certain people don't like you right now does not mean that there's necessarily something wrong with you, or that you're wasting your life because you don't have tons of friends and you're not partying. Or people will say college is the best 4 years of your life, you should experiment. Look, if college is the best 4 years of your life, then you're doing life wrong.
Oh yeah. And
um,
you know what I hear in what you're saying is, sometimes we mystify the word purpose or the concept of
yes.
purpose in greater Christendom. But in actuality, the things that lead people to a transformed life, the things that have led me to allow God to begin the work of transforming me, was application in the practicality
Yeah.
of biblical concepts like purpose. Because it's one thing for me to tell you to stop spending all that money. Well, I didn't tell you what or how to steward your money. I just told you
Yeah.
what to do. And so being able to tell people and show people that purpose is not a one size fit all cookie cutter concept. It is what God has for you. And there are practical steps to finding and understanding and discerning what that is. So being able to apply that and help walk people through that, because what happens is when we just talk about concepts and we just tell people what they should do in terms of things like that, we forget about the discipleship aspect of the Christian faith. So
Yeah.
you are really good at production. So what sense does it look like for you to just be like, Maya, I think you got the stuff to produce. Go ahead. It would make more sense for you to say, I'm a producer. I have resources. There are things that I know. Let me walk you through this. Jesus doesn't like say, hey, yeah, you're going to go through a storm and you're going to be by yourself. Like, he doesn't do that.
Have
He doesn't
fun.
do that. He knows we need him.
Yeah.
So on that note, fam, please tell everybody where they can find you, what projects you're working on, all of those wonderful
Oh
things.
man. Oh man. I think should I say this? Okay, I will. It's kind of an exclusive. It's kind of in the works, but currently working on a mixtape slash playlist kind of thing. It's called Better Dreams. It's basically just a bunch of different songs, a combination of original songs and covers and stuff for later this year. It's just like a way for me to kind of just get a bunch of music out for free. So keep on the lookout for that. You can find me on Instagram, AJ underscore for short. Same thing with TikTok, AJ underscore for short, even though I'm not super active on TikTok. Then my YouTube channel is, of course, AJ for short. Wow, you never would have guessed it, would you? You can find me all over those places. I've been on a bit of a hiatus the last few months because of summer and kind of just how that goes with ministry and stuff. But I'm super excited for all the new music coming out this fall, as well as new videos and stuff on YouTube. Those are all great places to connect with me, send me a DM, strike up a conversation, etc. I post a lot about yerba mate, so if you like yerb, you will love my Instagram story.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for, you know, gracing us with your presence and your wisdom. You were dropping nuggets here and there. I think I'm gonna have to chop up these sermons that you just
Oh no.
spilled on this podcast. And for those who are in the comment section, thank you so much for spending time with us and dropping your comments and your reactions and all that. We appreciate you. You are valued, and we couldn't do this without you. And so, without further ado, live each day with the aim of becoming better and not bitter. And I will catch you on the next podcast. Grace and peace.